Thank you all very much for coming out. It was really exciting to see a bunch of familiar faces. For me, it's always a pleasure to do events like these because I get to interact with a lot of alumni, not to mention people who may be prospective future alumni. This year I did something that was a new one for me. We taught an executive course for people who had graduated from the Booth program. And one of the reasons these kinds of classes are really exciting is it reminds me how good our alumni are. It was definitely it was an interesting dry run for me to see how well analytics could be taught, taught at sort of the managerial level rather than at the PhD academic level, and it went over terrifically well. So let me tell you a little bit about analytics at Booth, right? Well, first of all, 50 years ago we revolutionized finance, now we're on to marketing. This is something the Booth School's been actually using in its external communications in the last few years, and it's largely related to the fact that in industry, we're finally seeing industry converging with the way we've been doing marketing at Booth since the 1970s. In the 1970s, we already had faculty working with marketing databases from retailers, for example, and doing optimization of pricing, marketing mix decisions, etc. And so for me, someone who's a little bit on the younger side from the Booth marketing group, it's been exciting to be here at the time where we're seeing this convergence. Now, of course, this isn't just something we're saying at Booth. This is a statement that we're seeing, a sentiment we're seeing reflected in industry as well. Chief economist at Google, Hal Varian, for years now has been arguing that marketing is the new finance. And by that, what he means is that in the 1960s and early 70s, the access to financial data, your ability to track cross days or even intraday, the price movements of different kinds of securities revolutionized finance. It was the era, if you will, of quantitative finance. And that's very similar to where we are these days with marketing. If anything, I've got a few folks in the room who've figured this out a long time ago. This is somewhere where we've been now for at least 15 years, but it's becoming a lot more mainstream. Patrick Doyle, who's a former student of ours at Booth, now the CEO of Domino's, when he speaks to our students, reminds them that there's a heck of a lot more analytics going on in the marketing division of Domino's Pizza than there is in the finance division of Domino's Pizza. What this means is we're going to start seeing a movement away of the analytics talent from Wall Street towards Madison Avenue. And we're already seeing that in industry. Yesterday I had a really nice meeting with a couple of our students who are working on a new startup. And what this startup does is tracks MBA students across various peer schools. So these are all some of the leading MBA institutions in the US. And by discipline, showing what kind of job offers they're getting. And what's interesting to see is this migration of marketing, our best marketing students in particular, not in the traditional sense where they would turn down a brand management job to do consulting, usually for a salary-related reason, although sometimes they'll argue otherwise. They're going to the tech sector. Because Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they're beating management consulting now. These are the folks that have figured out already they need that analytics skill in the marketing division. So one thing that's been fun for me is 2 years ago I took over our Kilt Center for Marketing as the academic director. And what's been fun about that timing is that really the Marketing Center at Booth has become a global hub for quantitative marketing. And in some ways the Kilt Center is very reminiscent of CRISP, our Center on Research and Securities Prices, which by the way in the late 60s and early 70s was facilitating the data that was used to revolutionize quantitative finance. David Booth, our namesake, is probably one of the best living case examples of that kind of a revolution. What do we have at the Kilt Center? We have the world's leading quantitative marketing faculty. We've never tried to hire a quantitative marketing faculty and failed to hire that person, right? Our faculty for a long time has worked on developing quantitative methodologies, but what's special about our faculty, and this is really more to the heart of the school than just about marketing specifically, is that these methods are always geared towards generating useful qualitative and substantive insights. So we're not just a bunch of equation geeks writing down methods to tease our brains. This is about developing tools from which we can benefit by being able to extract better and more information from our data. And then finally, our center houses a bunch of really big marketing databases, most notably the Nielsen data. We are in charge of distributing all of Nielsen's data globally for academic usages. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the academic literature on quantitative marketing, the Nielsen data is probably the most commonly used databases for developing and testing and evaluating quantitative marketing amongst academics. So the program, I suppose, that Elizabeth was mentioning earlier is really a reflection of our Chicago booth approach to marketing. What I'd like to do with the remainder of my time now is try and get you acquainted with what that means. What is the Chicago booth approach to marketing? And of course, for those of you who are familiar with the Chicago approach, we're going to have examples and cases here. I'm not just going to do a sales pitch, right? If you're willing to come here and listen to an academic faculty from booth, that means you're going to be in the classroom momentarily, right? First of all, let me just say a few big things about analytics, because I think one of the biggest challenges for managers today in bringing analytics into their decision-making process is that there's a lot of enthusiasm from above, sometimes starting with the C-suite, to implement analytic methods, but a lot of the time, mostly this consists of the use and often misuse of a lot of complicated jargon without much of a roadmap for how it's going to be implemented, or moreover, what kind of expectations the organization should have vis-a-vis where the ROI is going to come from. What's the payoff from all this, right? I think Dan Ariely put it best. Dan is an academic and also a popular author on the psychology of decision making. He said, big data is like teenage sex. Everyone talks about it. Nobody really knows how to do it. Everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, so everyone claims they are doing it, right? Couldn't have put it better, right? So I'll quote someone from another school who said it best, right? That's the big elephant in the room. People are claiming to invest in things like big data. Most companies don't actually know what big data really means, let alone what they should expect from investing in big data. So let's settle the confusion very briefly here. Most of the time when companies say they're using big data to solve a problem, especially in the domain of marketing, they're actually not using big data. This is just a word that's often used interchangeably with, we're using data and analytics. No problem, by the way. I think there's huge benefits to doing data and analytics, but it can become very confusing when people use the term big data as an all-encompassing reference to doing analytics. Let me just briefly say that big data obviously involves using analytics to make decisions, etc. But what I think is unique about really doing big data in the way that academics intended the use of the term big data means that my desktop computer, forget about my desktop, my server is just going to be vastly inadequate to do any kind of analysis. The data sets that I'm collecting are so big that I can't store them on a disk, let alone open them in any kind of useful software package. This could be because I've tracked so many observations. So imagine if Amazon wanted to store every single time a unique person came to their website and visited their properties. Just the visit data alone, this would start growing into a monstrous size, right? Or alternatively, had some conversations before the talk today with folks working in the financial services industry. The number of things I can track about somebody who's using my credit card, who's borrowed money, somebody who's getting a loan to buy a car, the amount of stuff I can track in financial services can make the data set unwieldy, not because of the number of observations, but the number of columns I'm tracking. Again, what makes this big data is the fact that I'm going to have to take advantage of breakthroughs in high technology. I'm going to need some kind of a cluster of computers, and I'm probably going to need to use computer science methods just to do something simple like calculate an average. Okay? That's big data. And frankly, most marketing organizations really don't need to use big data. This is not to say big data is not interesting. I'll show you some stuff I did with some machine learning tools momentarily. But for most of us, what we really need to know is just broadly, what does it mean to do analytics? In some sense, we need to learn how to wean ourselves of the jargon and focus on the substance. What is marketing analytics? I think of marketing analytics as a blend of things. First of all, it starts off with quantitative marketing frameworks. Without wanting to scare everyone off, I mean theory, right? You can't talk about analytics without having theories about the behavior of the people who you're going to be trying to analyze and study, right? So in an analytics program, it's going to be critical to have at least a little bit of emphasis on theories of customers, how customers behave, on competitors, how we think they're going to react to our decisions, etc. We then combine that with marketing databases. Think of the databases as being our evidence, right? The theory can only take us so far, and at the University of Chicago, theory has always been backed up with empirical evidence, right? The evidence. And when I think of what are we doing when we're doing analytics, we're using methodologies and tools to combine the data with the methods and to study the data through the lens of our frameworks. In other words, we're going to use statistical tools, computer science tools, to analyze the data through the lens of our theory model of how people behave. That's sort of the idea. Why would we want to do all this? And that's sort of like the big question, right? Why do we want to do this? Well, first and foremost, to formulate logical marketing strategies. The number of companies I've engaged with where the way decisions are made is largely guesswork and more often than not, inertia. We do this because this is how we've always done things. If you start to question it, sometimes someone's a little sensitive about being questioned. Will say, well, last year we made X whatever amount of dollars. You can put in however many zeros you want. To which the correct answer is, what if it could have been 2X? I mean, we really just don't know because the only justification for your decision was we didn't make negative profit last year, which means people aren't thinking about the opportunity costs, what we could have been making had we used our resources more efficiently. So first and foremost, analytics is about helping us articulate and quantify logical strategies. And then quantifying, measuring the benefits, right? I'd like at the end of the day to know what I actually got from this. And then finally, and for me this is always the most important thing for marketing to get out of the 20th century and to be an active part of the 21st century, is accountability. Learning how to take our quantitative measures, our analytics, to optimize, meaning that when we make a marketing decision, an investment, that decision will be optimized against some kind of objective, like I wanted to make money, and I'd like to make as much money with my current resources and knowledge, to measure ROI so that we can be more accountable with the rest of the organization. The chief marketing officer should be using metrics to justify budget requests from the chief financial officer. And what analytics is all about in marketing is bringing accountability into the practice of marketing. While I love the show Mad Men, it casts a really negative aspersion on the practice of marketing. Most marketing these days doesn't involve drinking cocktails at 9 a.m. while deliberating over what ad creative to use. Although I'll be honest, that sounds like a lot of fun, right? So let's look at some examples now. I want to look at two case studies in particular, where I'm going to try and put my money where my mouth is a bit here. The first case study here is a study of pricing at a company called ZipRecruiter.com. This is a project that's ongoing. I'm a collaborator with ZipRecruiter, along with Sanjog Misra, who some of you met on Friday at our management conference. So Sanjog just recently joined the Booth School. And so Sanjog and I have been working with ZipRecruiter now since last summer. And part of this engagement was to try and look for an opportunity to collaborate. This is not a consulting project. This is a research project. The terms of trade were very simple. ZipRecruiter will let us publish. I've got their CEO now. Mr. Zwelling is now on the paper, which is why I'm allowed to mention the name of the company here. Again, Mr. Zwelling is actually quite visionary, realized how are they possibly going to lose out from having their insights published in the public domain. It's not that their competitors are reading the academic journals or coming to academic investigations, and plus, he'll be already 2 years ahead of them by the time they find the paper if they do. At any rate, let me tell you a quick few things about ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter is the fastest growing HR company right now. They've currently got 45,000 active employers who are posting jobs on their online platform. So the way ZipRecruiter works, it's a lot like an online dating site. Recruiters come in and post jobs on the platform and they pay a fee for that service. And then the platform brings in, without a fee, prospective hires. And what they use is a large scale, they actually have a computer science algorithm, i.e. they use big data, to try and match people. And part of what's been a success for them has been the very high quality of matches, as seen by the high repeat rates of their recruiters, not to mention a lot of their non-quantitative, more text feedback, and the high conversion rates. So again, they have an algorithm they use to help recruiters find prospective employees. These jobs range from, I need somebody to drive a truck from LA to Boston, to I'm looking for a chief marketing officer. Their largest segment are starters. These are smaller companies that are a starting phase, but they've got quite a few clients who are up in the Fortune 100 as well. So they're really covering the entire gambit of recruiting and looking at jobs that range from short-term consulting to a long-term permanent employee. So we had a bunch of initial meetings with them, and the idea was to get acquainted with what it is they're doing at the organization. One of the things that came up was pricing. I teach the pricing class for the MBA program at Booth. So we had some questions about how they set prices, and it turns out they charge $99 a month for their service. So for most of their business segments, the typical fee is $99 a month. So then I came up with the super deep, highly academically based question, why $99? And actually I was really surprised by the answer. The answer I got was, well, it used to be lower. I'm like, okay, well, how did you come up with the lower number? We don't really know. And they said, well, why 99? I said, well, it seemed like we were undercharging. Or why do you think you were undercharging? Oh, we don't really know. I said, okay, well, how did you come up with the price point? I said, well, originally, we looked at what other recruiting companies were charging, and then we charged a small fraction of that because we figured no one will have heard of us. I'm like, okay, now you have awareness, how 99? He goes, you know, the truth is we really have no idea. Would you be interested in helping us solve our pricing problem? I'm like, wow, sure, I would love to work on that because that's what I do, pricing. So we ran a massive experiment. And because the meeting, they have a lot of very talented people working for them, and because in the meeting they themselves sounded kind of funny and ironic that they also couldn't figure out where their pricing was, this was an incredibly ambitious pricing experiment. So again, just to set this up here, the price experiment is very simple. For the month of September, every starter organization that came to ZipRecruiter.com that was a new client for them was randomly assigned to one of the price cells in our experiment. We ran this for an entire month. This was over at the end of the day. It was a little bit bigger than the starters. I'm just going to focus on the starters. That's 8,000 customers, business-to-business customers, had a price randomly assigned to them. There's actually quite a few more that were in there, as I said, but let's focus on those starters. Here's the design of the experiment. First of all, you can see we tested 10 different price levels. I apologize if this is hard to see at the back here. We tested monthly prices that range from as low as $19 to as high as $299. So again, it's the same service. You get, it's like a lottery, which price you get. We had the original price of $99 in there. That's going to be our control condition. And the 9 other prices we tested, think of those as the test conditions. Okay, so we tested 10 price levels, and we let it rip for a month. We had 7,800 starter-size firms who were in this experiment. And I've got a bar here for each of the price buckets in our experiment. And the height of the bar is the fraction of people that actually paid. The way this works is you come to their platform, you fill in a registration page. You have to do that before you can get quoted a price. If you fill in the registration page, I get tons of details about you as a firm and about your jobs that you're posting. And then you click price quote, and then you're taken to a paywall. So to be in this experiment, you had to have completed the registration and requested a price and hit the paywall. Conditional on hitting the paywall, you are then randomly assigned to one of these prices. The response rates I've got here, the conversions are, did you actually enter credit information and sign up and pay? So the data I've got here is just for the first month. Obviously, I don't have the slides on this. We continued tracking people for more than 1 month, but for the first month versus more than 1 month, main findings don't actually change that much. So as you would expect, if I charge you $19 a month, the conversion rate is going to be a lot higher than if I charge you $399 a month. But that wasn't the part that excited us about these data. What excited us about these data is the following. When I go from $99 to $299, a 4-fold increase in the price, conversion doesn't go down all that much. In fact, this surprised ZipRecruiter. They said, we would have never guessed our customers were that insensitive to the price. And my response to that is, yeah, that's exactly what happens when you are not aligning the prices you charge with the value you're delivering, right? This is just a fundamental mistake. That's step 1 of marketing. Is your pricing strategy aligned with your value proposition? This shows me it definitely wasn't. The other thing about this slide that was really fun, this part doesn't pop out, I'll just have to tell you, was before the experiment finished, we got a very enthusiastic phone call from them saying this experiment is the greatest idea. They'd never run a test like this before. I go, why is that? Well, we made a lot of money off this experiment. I go, what do you mean? Well, think about one of the main reasons why your company might not want to run an experiment. People are going to be afraid that you're going to test something really suboptimal, and because you've tested something that's a really bad idea to do in practice, you're going to lose money from that. There's an opportunity cost from the experiment. That actually didn't happen here. You can't see it from looking at this slide, although if you tabulate all the numbers, you could work it out. But if I just charged everyone $99, right, the amount of money I would have made would be 13% lower than what I got from the experiment. Why? Because it turns out that while lots of people paid $19, a lot of people also paid $249. And the experiment, I got the percentages backwards, the experimental revenues were 13% higher than what I would have got, or the company would have got that month, had they just charged $99 as usual. So yeah, we tested some suboptimal bins, but we were more than offset by that with the fact that people were willing to pay high prices. So here I'm just going to look at revenues. The unit costs are basically zero, right? There's very little cost to managing a customer on this website. Most of the costs for this business are the upfront fixed costs from investing in developing the website and then managing the site. Per customer costs are rather negligible. So I'm just going to focus on revenues per customer. Like before, I've got the same original price we charged. Here I've got the 10 buckets of our price experiment. All I've done here is I've changed conversion on the vertical axis to their monthly revenue per customer in dollars. So you can think of this in expectation. How much money do I expect to earn per customer in each of these cells? So what it is the conversion rate times the price, right? So look what happens in the $19 cell. I had way higher conversion, but the price is so low, this is a terrible cell. Here's where we would be normally if we just stuck with the status quo. And here we're starting getting close to the optimum. I can almost see the optimal price pop out of the picture for me. And you can see that if I was to charge $249 per month, revenues would go up. Expected revenues would go up by 60%. So you can see a huge potential return here from doing nothing more than changing my uniform list price that I quote to my customers. So the first conclusion we can draw is definitely $99 was a terrible price. $249 is much better. I don't have a slide on it, but if I was to reevaluate the experiment against the next 5 months of revenues, the optimal price would probably be about $235. Very small difference between the 1 month optimal and the 5 month optimal. The key is $99 isn't even in the ballpark. Now, what's the conceptual exercise I just went through? I estimated a demand curve. I didn't use any statistics. I didn't use any modeling or methods. I literally just tested enough price points that the demand curve revealed itself to me. I could be an incredibly unskilled manager with no statistical background, and I can still figure out what demand looks like simply by my volition to run an experiment and test more than 1 or 2 prices. We then came up with the optimum, that $249 price, and you can see that the profitability from that price is just the area of this rectangle. It's our unit margin, price minus cost, in this case cost is basically 0, times the number of units we would sell at that price. Now, of course, what I've just done is solved essentially ZipRecruiter's optimal uniform price problem, but why stop there? This is money left on the table. That whole purple region, every sale from here down to here represents people who are willing to pay a lot more money than $249. So why am I charging them $249? And on top of that, everybody on the demand curve from here down to the remaining 100%, right? These are all people who wouldn't pay $249, but they're willing to pay way more than unit cost. So why am I not serving them? In other words, why am I standardizing my price at $249? It seems like I'm still leaving commercial opportunity lying there in front of me. So what if instead I could target? I did tell you that at the registration stage, I collect tons of information about these companies, right? So let's suppose I could engage in customer recognition. Well, I might not be tracking you over time because you're a new customer. I might nevertheless, based on the bundle of things you tell me about your company and about the job postings, I might be able to say something about where you are on the demand curve, which means based on those data, I could target a price to you. I'm literally going to do what in the consumer space we call personalized pricing, where each customer coming to my website, so it's not mine, I better be careful here, to their website, each customer hitting the paywall will get their own unique personalized price. And so the idea is I'm going to try and go after all the potential profits under this demand curve. I'm going to capture all the value. Everyone will be quoted as close as I can get to their actual optimal price, and therefore there will be no commercial opportunity left on the table. Imagine someone's pitching to you this and you're saying, this is going to cost me a fortune to do this. Why would I ever want to do this? Well, that's actually an easy question to answer. If you know what the upfront bill is to track data, to put a computer processing in place so you can execute these prices quote unquote fast enough, if you know what those investments will cost you, the return on your investment will just be the area of this piece here and this piece here. From my experiment in September, I've got all the analytics you need to estimate approximately what the return on investment will be. If I take this thing here and this thing here and discount it over whatever you think is the appropriate number of months, we can figure out if the net present value of a cash flow in the indefinite future where we're targeting is going to be big enough to justify that upfront investment. This is what I mean by marketing can be accountable. Instead of telling the CFO, we need to catch up and join the modern era and do big data, instead I'm going to say, I have an incredibly large cash flow positive investment opportunity for this company. It's called targeting. Here's what it's going to cost. And here's my analytics to demonstrate for you what the return on that investment would be. I'll be mission accomplished. I'm ready to retire when this is just standard fare for how companies do quantitative marketing. All right, only one problem with this thing. They have a lot of customers. 45,000 active ones, new customers coming in every day, and even worse, every customer is unique. In some industries, there's a lot of homogeneity, but in this industry, customers are unique. The good news is that means lots of opportunities from targeting. The bad news is this is going to be really hard because there's lots of different customers. Each of them, while they're using this same recruiting service, has a different benefit from it. The returns to matching a trucker with a shipping job is very different from finding you a chief financial officer. And at the end of the day, I would need to be able to figure out every single one of these customers' perception of value and what their willingness to pay is for this service. That's not the end of it. What I really need is an algorithm then, so that, number one, I can learn something about differences in customer needs. More importantly, that I can quantify the differences across these customers and how much they value the service at ZipRecruiter. Then I have to be able to optimize a price for each customer, where optimize means for your company specifically, what is the most profitable price I could possibly charge you? And then I have to be able to implement it. Another wrinkle, dimensionality. I know a lot of stuff about these companies. Technically speaking, once you tell me what state you're in, what kind of benefits you offer, what kind of job descriptions there are, what kind of a business you are, there are tens of thousands of things that I could potentially target on, which means this is going to get unwieldy really fast. This is a big data problem. More importantly, and this is the real hard part, there's about 20 milliseconds that elapse between the time you say price quote and you actually hit the paywall. So if I want to convince ZipRecruiter to test this for me, I can't do any more. They told me if you can get it down to under 12 milliseconds, we're in. So I need an algorithm to be able to personalize prices to any company based on tens of thousands of attributes and to execute that optimized price in about 11 milliseconds. So we had an approach for doing this. Our approach, I start off the lecture saying jargon can be misleading and confusing, then I'm just going to use jargon on this slide. But if anyone here knows me or the rest of the faculty at the University of Chicago, if you want the equations, that ain't a problem. We'd be happy to deliver the equations. What I'm going to use is what's called a logistic model of demand. I'm going to need a model now. I can't just let the experiment tell me demand, because I would need to know something about the relationship between your demand and your characteristics. So I'm going to use a model called a logistic model. There are tens of thousands of firm and job attributes that are going to go into this model to help me understand the nuances and why some people are willing to pay less and why some people are willing to pay more. And I'm going to use an algorithm that's very reminiscent of elastic nets. It's got a few bells and whistles attached to it, but this is essentially a machine learning algorithm. Machine learning being what most people are supposed to mean when they say they're doing big data. I'm going to use machine learning from computer science. A small wrinkle in this is we've added a layer to this so we can actually say something about its statistical properties. One of the problems with machine learning and computer science is it's great for prediction, but it's not very useful for saying things like, how sure are we about this prediction? And if I'm going to set a price, how sure am I that my profits are going to go up? And what's my reasonable amount of what's my credibility forecast on the likely range of profit increases I could hope to experience? So this is all in the project itself. Let me just show you some of the findings here. This is all calibrated with our September experiment data. If I was to use my model and algorithm to target all the people who came to the website in September, here's the range of prices I would have charged. These are the distribution, if you will, of optimized prices. There's a little bump here because it turns out that the company wasn't comfortable charging more than $499. So what this tells us is there's a bunch of people who we predict would be willing to pay more than $499. Otherwise, you can see a huge dispersion. we've got people for whom the optimal price would be around $99. That's the price they were charging. And then we have prices all the way up to $500. So you can see that the targetability information, conditional on my models actually doing something useful, right, seems to be pretty dispersed. There's a lot of heterogeneity, at least according to our algorithm in our model, right? I'm going to have to validate this now. According to my model, again, according to this approach, we would predict that if the company implemented the recommendations, if they used our $249 uniform price, they would get $36 per organization that hits the paywall. And that's in contrast $24 per organization at the $99 price. If instead they gave each of the organizations that hit the paywall one of our targeted prices from our targeting algorithm, we expect an additional bump from 36 up to 43. And just to be academically honest here, the actual credible range, given my statistical uncertainty, is in the range of 38 to 51, but clearly higher even than my uniform price that we saw earlier. Okay, this is all predictions now. And making predictions is one thing. What you'd really like to know is, does the model that I've just proposed actually have any bite? So we ran another experiment. In November, for the entire month, we did the same thing as we did in September. Every new starter firm that arrived at their paywall in November was randomly assigned to one of these 3 pricing conditions. Condition 1, called as control or status quo, you get charged $99. Condition 2, you get that $249 price. Condition 3, you get your optimal targeted price. And we did a little oversampling on this one just to make sure that we had enough information in there. So we ran and evaluated it. First thing we did was said, let's compare the range, that credible range of profits under our theory model, to what we actually got from the experiment. Well, not surprisingly, the experiment is a little bit more noise, but look how closely the revenues per organization line up. There is no way you're going to get that close of a lineup by pure chance and luck. When we saw this, we're like, holy crap, this algorithm really worked well. And the company is now has actually been deploying some of this pricing, as you would expect. Overall, revenues have increased by somewhere between 30 and 80%. The company, of course, has observed that conversion rates are slightly lower and churn rates are slightly higher. That's what you would expect when you raise the price from $99 to $249, or you have all these personalized prices across the board. However, to say they were excited about this would be an understatement. They are already in the process of running the same templates of experiment, model, validation experiment in all of their other customer segments, right up to the Fortune 100. So I use this as an example to show you what I mean by the analytics paradigm. We used pretty old-fashioned theory of what economists call price discrimination. Marketers are better at marketing, and so they would call this targeting or personalization. But these are very old theories. You can find these theories discussed in textbooks from the 1930s. Pigou, a very famous British economist in the 30s, had already talked about targeted pricing like this and said it was theoretically interesting but clearly infeasible, that no one could ever do this except maybe with negotiated prices, which would have all other sorts of limitations. Think of what I've just done here as being a robotic substitute to an imperfect negotiation to personalize your prices. And hopefully the computer will be able to use these customer data much better than the sales agent would use them. So this is old theory. We've used state-of-the-art computer science methods. We collected data from an experiment so that they were clean and credible. And then we validated, and the final picture then is, here's the return on investment. We have some accountability for our recommended decisions. I used computer science for this example, but I did start off the lecture saying, you don't necessarily need to be doing big data to benefit from all of the recent advances in access to data and methods and so forth. I mean, Doug Merrill, I never actually met him. He was the former CIO at Google, once said very nicely, with too little data, you won't be able to make any conclusions you trust. Fair enough, right? At the same time, with loads of data, you'll find relationships that simply aren't real. By the law of large numbers, you will start to find strange correlations that are just by chance. As they always say in academia, if you have an infinite number of monkeys typing on an infinite number of typewriters, eventually you get the complete works of Shakespeare. This is by pure randomness, right? And big data isn't really about bits. It's not about how big your data set is. It's about talent. It's about how cleverly you use the data. So what I'm saying is that when I'm thinking about the data revolution in marketing, it's not just about sophisticated methods in modeling and statistics, although your expertise and your facility with those things can certainly be beneficial to your company. The real opportunities lie in sophisticated thinking and applying that clever thinking to the data analysis to provide novel insights. And when I give a day course or a half-day course on big data, the first thing I always talk about is customer insights. Then we go through all the testing and stuff I talked about a moment ago to make sure the insights you've got are robust and credible. But it's really about insight generation. So what I'd like to do now is show you some data-generated insights, not about pricing, but about branding. Because nothing could be more fundamental to the practice of marketing than understanding your brand and understanding how to get better returns from your brands. So what I'm going to do is look at some data-generated insights to look at something I've been working on for several years now in my own research, which is trying to understand how much of the price premium that customers pay for branded goods is due to the fact that they perceive these brands as superior versus they really just don't know any better, and so they buy the brand as a default. The easiest way to motivate this is to look at an example. This is a screenshot from CVS Pharmacy in 2015. This is what happened when I did a keyword search on their homepage for aspirin. The first link that popped up was for Bayer aspirin. That's their top-selling brand of aspirin. We all heard of it. And their top-selling pack size, which is 100 tablets for a price of $6.29. And notice at the bottom here, CVS posts, right, juxtaposed next to it, its own brand, its private label, which has the same color scheme, a very similar set of fonts. This is very deliberate. You try and mimic one of the leading national brands. Same size pack for only $1.59. Now we can say whatever we want about, well, the packages aren't identical, maybe the tablets are easier to pop out with the brand name versus the own brand, but if your goal here is to cure a headache, it's the same molecule. They have the same active ingredient, they're made on the same types of facilities with the same FDA requirements and inspections, etc. Simply put, neither of these aspirins is going to be superior at curing your headache. These are both over the counter, you buy them without a prescription, you get the idea. And that sort of raises the question, if you can get them for $1.59, why would you be willing to pay 3 to 4 times as much just to get the branded alternative? So I had a lot, of course, I'm very interested in brands, and I think very often brands proxy for lots of other things, image, lifestyle. Sometimes they're very important, really related to quality. If you look at how private labels have struggled to compete with breakfast cereals, for example, things as simple as how long a breakfast cereal sits on the milk, retaining its crunchiness and flavor before it soaks up the milk, sinks, and becomes mushy. These are things that private brands have had a much harder time mimicking than in other categories. So clearly I can't believe that brands are just about information. But nevertheless, I do wonder whether in certain circumstances information plays a role, and I guess you could think the question boils down to what fraction of willingness to pay comes from information versus these other quality-related issues. So this was another case study we did with the Nielsen data. It's kind of quasi-big data if you ask industry to use the term. Obviously, I can do this on my desktop computer, so it's not really big data. But I used a sample of 112,000 households that I observed from 2004 to 2012. I observe every time they go to a grocery store, pharmacy, convenience store, mass merchandiser, etc. I have a total of 66 million shopping trips to analyze. And all I'm going to calculate from these 66 million trips is what fraction of the time when you buy headache medicines is it branded versus unbranded. So all of these circles on my graph here, each circle represents an occupation code. I ran a survey with Nielsen, surveyed 112,000 households, and for those households, I know exactly what the heads of household occupations are using the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They have about 1,500 different classifications. So every circle here is an occupation. The diameter of the circle is proportional to how many of my households have someone who's a head of household working in that occupation. This to give you an idea of which occupations are well represented, which ones aren't. For each circle, the center is shifted to the right according to the median income associated with that occupation, and it's shifted vertically upwards where the center is according to the average pill volume in the headache medicines that's unbranded as opposed to branded. And then finally, I've color-coded in red healthcare occupations, because it's my belief that if you work in a healthcare occupation, your occupational expertise should imply that you know by now that unbranded medicine is exactly the same as branded medicine. And you can just stare at this picture. You could run as many regressions as you want, but this picture pops. This result pops. It is very clear that if you go to any of these red occupations, with the exception of pharmaceuticals reps, right? If you go to any of these other occupations, and you look vertically at only at other occupations that have the same income. That's important because socioeconomic status is another good reason to buy private labels. I just need to save money. So controlling for income, you can see these healthcare occupations are way above all these other occupations with the same income. So you can see the insight here. Experts are more likely to buy unbranded. Pharmacists buy 91% unbranded headache medicines. I mean, once you get to that number, I can't rule out that the only reason it's not 100% is just availability or they forget or whatever. Pharmacists are buying 91% unbranded. The average non-healthcare worker buys only 74% unbranded medicine. So again, why would I pay why pay $6.99 when I can pay $1.49? Well, apparently pharmacists would share that view, but other people don't always share that view. This is one piece of evidence that seems suggestive it might be due to information. Just so we don't get hung up on the nuances of how doctors and pharmacists buy drugs, this is the exact same case study, except now I'm looking at people's purchases behavior for pantry staples. Salt, flour, sugar, granulated sugar. And in red, I've coded in all the people who work in food preparation and chefs, right? So, and catering. And you can see here that chefs are buying a lot more private unbranded salt, flour, baking soda, etc., than people with the same incomes as this. As you can see, chefs don't make very good income in my sample. Rick Bayless apparently is not a Nielsen household, right? But you get the idea here, right? This isn't just about how doctors buy drugs. This seems to be panning out also when you look at how chefs buy unbranded food. And what's really remarkable is I didn't code it in here, doctors, pharmacists, nurses look no different from the masses in this picture. When you take them out of their occupational expertise, they start buying more branded goods. And similarly, chefs and food preparers look exactly like the masses when you put them in the headache relief aisle. What this suggests is when people are shopping in areas where they have domain expertise, right, seems like they're less likely to buy brands than there are other people of the same socioeconomic status but don't have the expertise. So this has been a really interesting area for my collaborators and I. So this is something, some of you may have seen these pictures. There was an NPR story about this, and it was featured a lot couple of years ago in the popular press. But one of the things that's been sort of gnawing at me for the last few years is all I've done is said that experts are less likely to buy unbranded. That's interesting from an academic point of view, but doesn't really help us as managers. What I wondered was, is there some intervention we can do? Is there a marketing intervention that can actually teach people that it's just about information? If it's that simple, you just need expertise, maybe there's an intervention we can run, a promotion, a deal, some sort of campaign. You know, medicine has been asking this question since the 80s. In the early 80s, experiments were run where people were actually sat down and told about drugs and medication, and in a test group, people were literally shown, hey, this is the same active ingredient as that. The branded and unbranded are identical. If you just tell people that, it doesn't change their shopping. You sit down and explain to someone it's the same thing, they still go and buy branded goods the same as people in the control condition. So you can't really just change people. A study was done last year in a grocery chain on the West Coast where they put the information on the aisle. Right next to the price, they said, has the same active ingredient as, right? No change in store sales for the test and control. So it seems like simply giving people the information isn't enough. And what makes matters worse is in most categories, it's not as easy as an over-the-counter headache medicine. The information isn't objective. It's a very subjective question. Do you think these cookies taste as good as those ones? Even if most people say this one tastes better, how could I possibly disagree with you if you think this one tastes better? This is a subjective point. So what we did was we ran blind taste tests here in Chicago in Mariano's. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Mariano's chain. Bob Mariano has been an incredibly active alumnus, very engaged with the school on research. In the 1990s, some of the faculty ran one of the biggest price experiments at that time where they tested the EDLP pricing structure across stores. They actually took 80-some plus stores of Dominic's Fine Food in the 90s and randomly assigned them to EDLP pricing and high-low pricing. And this was stuff that affected 80% of store revenues, and they left these conditions in place for a quarter of a year and found that while EDLP stores did drive a little more traffic, it wasn't nearly enough to compensate for low margins. And as a result, Dominic's never did EDLP pricing, even though they were very worried about the potential entry of Walmart and other EDLP competitors. So Bob has a long history of doing it. That study, by the way, is published in an academic journal. The Dominic's chain is named. Bob Mariano is thanked. He's another one of these entrepreneurs. Well, he's more than an entrepreneur, a very successful businessman who actually believes in this engagement with academia. So I've been talking to them for a while now. The blind taste test was actually not my original plan of what I was going to do to them, but I went to Mariano's stores just wandering around trying to get ideas. And all I did was ask him at a meeting where I was pitching something else, said, why do you have all these free samples? He goes, well, why do you think we have the free samples? I go, no, I get what the goal is here, but what makes you so sure free samples work? He goes, oh, we know they work. I go, how do we know they work? Well, people get very enthusiastic. I go, yeah, I get that people give you anecdotal feedback, but how do you actually measure the return on investment of a free sampling? Because sampling isn't cheap. You have dedicated sales personnel. This is often coordinated across stores. You've got sometimes a half day or more of labor. There's the setup. There's the actual product, which you're delivering for free, the waste, et cetera, et cetera. There's no measurement of ROI. So I talked to folks at Nielsen. How do you guys do ROI on sampling? He goes, nobody does ROI on sampling. So I went back to Mariano's and asked them a very simple question. I said, why don't you ask people to scan their loyalty cards when you give them a sample? And I was summarily rejected. There was a bunch of category managers there. I did a pricing program for them. They said, you can't bug people like that. A week later, I get an email from their vice president saying, we've been talking. We absolutely think you can do that. Tell us what you want to do. And so what we did was we decided to do something like the Pepsi Challenge. Remember the Pepsi Challenge? Except it has some extra bells and whistles attached to it. But the basic idea is Pepsi Challenge. Customers are walking in the store, there's a stand set up where they can get a free sample, but you can't just eat the free sample, you have to get it delivered via Pepsi Challenge. You're going to have the store brand and the closest competing, according to them anyhow, national brand. You're going to do a blind taste test. In addition to that, before you get to do the blind taste test, we have the sales attendant monitoring the stand, asks you a bunch of questions, survey questions about your beliefs about the quality of these private labels, right? We managed to recruit over 1,000 people who actually did the free sampling, did the blind taste test, and because they had to swipe their loyalty cards, I know how you shop before you did the blind taste test, and I know how you shop after you did the blind taste test. In sum, I can see, does treating you with your subjective information about the tastiness of a product actually change your shopping behavior? So we used 3 different product categories. There's always one at a time. You didn't get a choice. The first one was for cookies, Roundy's O's versus Oreos. Second was for Greek yogurt, Roundy's Greek yogurt versus Chobani. And the third one was for ice cream, Roundy's Select ice cream and Breyer's ice cream. So this is essentially what it would look like. You can see here, you'd walk in the store, there'd be a stand set up where you'd have free samples. It was actually a slightly bigger display than this because of all the other information. What was different was that each sales associate, and this was done across 9 different stores. It was done on, I forget how many different times we actually ran this. It was quite a few. At any rate, the sales associate was pre-trained and had a pre-programmed tablet device. So they bought about a dozen of these tablet devices, hired a company to pre-program them for us. And so before you could start, at the stand, you had to swipe your loyalty card. Say, we're giving out free samples and we're doing a little marketing demonstration, but you have to swipe your card. Everyone swiped their card. No problems on that one. Then we asked you a bunch of questions on the tablet. We're able to then record your answers, but because we've swiped your card, we can then match all your responses with your shopping behavior. So let's start with this survey. Very basic questions. The first question we ask people is, do you think private labels, or they actually was phrased as the own brand, do you think Roundy's own brand is at least as good as the national brands in most categories? 81% almost say yes. So the overwhelming majority of customers who participated at least in the study believe that the own brand at Roundy's is at least as good as a national brand. We then showed them which blind taste test they'd be doing, and then asked them, do you think you'll prefer the private label? Surprisingly, only 43% thought they would pick the private label. So even though we say, I believe these things are at least as good quality, I doubt that I'm going to pick it, right? Less than 50% chance. Then we actually do the blind taste test. 73% pick the private label, which is actually not that different, given that there's noise and randomness in this, not that different from what people's initial beliefs were. Then we asked them, next time you buy in this category, do you think you'll buy the private label? And then almost shockingly overwhelming majority said yes, 84%, more than the beliefs question. 84%, yeah, of course I'm going to buy the own brand next time I go to the store. By the way, the actual post-test increase was only to 17%, right? Which was terrific because the base rate is private label in these categories, about 5% of the category. Getting that up to like 17% on the next trip is amazing, but hardly the 84%. I took a lot of stuff away from this survey before I even matched it to shopping data. Number one, purchase intentions are horrible data, right? We use them all the time because it's super easy to run a survey and ask people, what do you think you're going to buy? Do you think you're going to buy, right? Consultants are always selling us on these intentions data because it's super easy for them too. They already know how to do this. It doesn't require any out-of-the-box thinking. But what we took away from this was that people vastly underpredict the likelihood of choosing the private label, even after they just said they think these things are as good as the national brands. Then after they get that information, their responses to whether they'll buy it again is off the charts, way too high. Obviously, 84% of them aren't going to buy this next time they go shopping. Who knows? Maybe they were afraid to upset the surveyor. Maybe they were embarrassed because they'd just seen this inconsistency in their choices. The key is, stated purchase intentions is probably not going to be enough if we're trying to measure the return on investment from our campaign. If you're going to use stated purchase intentions, you need to use a scientific method like a conjoint experiment. I wasn't prepared to lecture on that today. So now let's think about how we're going to measure the effect of this campaign. There is a small problem with my campaign. Unlike ZipRecruiter, I didn't run an experiment. It would be impossible to randomly assign people as they enter the store to be able to do the blind taste test or not to do the blind taste test. First of all, if you get put in the control condition, you don't get the blind taste test, you're going to get annoyed. Second of all, if I assign you to the blind taste test, I can't force compliance, so I'll have lots of non-compliance issue. So basically, I have 1,100 self-selected volunteers who did the blind taste test. How the hell do I figure out if the blind taste test did anything? If I just compare volunteers to non-volunteers, I could get a huge effect from the blind taste test, because the types of people who love private labels all take the free sample, and the kind of people who hate private labels don't take the free sample. In other words, the blind taste test wouldn't have taught me anything about the effect of the blind taste test. It would have just taught me about the pre-existing prejudices of customers. So how am I going to solve this? I'm going to have to create what's called a quasi-experiment. Right? So instead of just comparing the level of purchases between participants and non-participants, which I'll now call test and control, what I'm going to do instead is compare differences between the two of them. I want to control for the fact that you may, on average, be the person who participates may be higher or lower in their propensity to buy. So what I'm going to do is just do the following. I'm going to compute what is the change in your shopping behavior before versus after in the test group. And I'm going to compare that to the change before versus after for people who are in the control group. In addition to ruling out the selection problems, that will also get rid of time trends. My control condition will also allow me to control for what the baseline rate was, because another problem here is, what if private labels were trending up or trending down naturally for other reasons? You know, maybe there was some bad press, maybe some new product was in the aisle. We need to control for all this. At any rate, this is a methodology called differences in differences, a very commonly used technique in the academic sciences. I've noticed that several practitioner firms are starting to use this more and more heavily. Sometimes it's called changes in changes. So let's just look at the data here. These are estimates. This is not just the raw data. These are estimates using that comparison of differences approach. What it tells us is that control subjects are buying just over maybe 5 to 6%, just between 5 and 6% private label as opposed to branded. This says conditional on you buy something in one of these categories, about 5 to 6% of the time you buy the unbranded alternative. Or Roundies probably wouldn't appreciate that, the own brand alternative. Right? I have to be careful here because private labels in the 80s were a very different entity than they are today. Kroger's, Mariano's, and others, their private labels are pretty high end. The week after the test, look what happens to that share. Week after the test, it goes from 6% to about 24%. You have an enormous spike the week after the test. And by the way, that spike is still over 15% if I drop same-day purchases. Because obviously one worry here is, oh yeah, sure, it's like a promotion of any other sort. You put up a big display, lots of people buy it because they think there's something special going on. There's a lingering effect, even that lasts the rest of the week. If I look from week 2 to week 4, i.e. the rest of the month, the effect gets smaller, but it's still hovering just below 10 percentage points, which is still much bigger than 6. And even from the first month, end of the first month, to 3 months after the test, the effect is still a full percentage or so, a percentage and a half. These are percentage points, right? higher than the base case, which means 3 months after I run the experiment, the market share amongst tested subjects is 1.5 percentage points higher than in the control condition. And you see the same effects when you do this category by category. You know, we had few people in each category, so things get a lot noisier. Qualitatively and directionally the same, but I have a lot less precision. Same thing in ice cream, although when I look at cookies, I have enough precision, sorry, yogurt rather, I actually do have enough precision to conclude not only that there's a difference between the control condition and the long-term effect of being in a blind taste test 3 months later, but that difference is more than a percentage point. These were strange results for me. I don't have this is still very much something in progress. I haven't even written this up as a paper yet, but I'm just excited about it. I think it's fun that you can measure ROI on something as basic as sampling, and moreover, that you might be able to teach a customer something, and the effect of that teaching lasts some duration of time. I can't rule out this would dissipate after 8 months. I can't exactly explain what the mechanism here is, although I could conjecture. One conjecture I might use would start with is people learn something and then they start forgetting. I learned that I like the private labels more than the national brand, but as time passes, I forget. You know, I'm buying lots of other stuff, and my shopping behavior starts converging back towards the baseline rate I was shopping at before I got taught. Or maybe this thing will last more indefinitely, and maybe there really is a bit of an initial promotion effect, and that what we're really seeing long term is the information effect. Be that as it may, the interesting thing here is at least 3 months later, the effect is surviving. What's the return on investment? Well, I actually don't know the total bill to Roundy's from running the campaign, but I do know one thing. If we were to look at the lift in profits, that short run lift is a 13.5% increase in profits. This is from running a blind taste test, right? Medium run, 2.5%. Long run, it's still more than a 1% increase in profits. So if you were skeptical about paying the bill for one of these promotional campaigns, if you're a manufacturer and you give a trade allowance or a marketing development fund to a retailer, and you wanted to know, is this really paying off? Well, you could run this thing and then use the same template here and then calculate, is this percent lift in profits enough to compensate for the cost of running the campaign? In sum, you should be able to do an ROI calculation. So let me just summarize here. You know, we're running out of time here. I think probably the most important point I wanted to make in this is that analytics is not about computer science replacing your managerial skill. There is no point in any of this work where your knowledge as a manager is somehow completely disregarded, and instead we let a robot make all the decisions. That would be bad analytics. Good analytics is about combining managerial insight and instincts with evidence. What I was doing in both of these case studies was thinking about how to get the evidence. And the managerial instincts were still useful, right? But they need to be combined with theory and data. First and foremost, as people are debating about their opinions, is there some theory that can help me clarify my opinion, or is there theory that makes my opinion seem pretty much inconsistent? Then we can whittle down the opinions, the differences of opinions, to the ones that seem to be logical, right? Once we've got the logical opinions, what the data and analytics are used for, first and foremost, is to test managerial opinions. Imagine that category managers at Roundy's were debating. Some thought that these samples were really important. Others thought they were a complete waste and wanted to get rid of them because they had to set them up and they found it annoying. You can think of this as a test for whether or not these things are a waste and whether or not all that annoyance is actually justifiable. More importantly, though, is being able to measure the return on investment from an expensive marketing investment. And again, this comes back to my broader point that it's okay to have managerial instincts and guesswork and judgments, but at some point we need accountability. And that's how we're going to bring marketing fully into the 21st century. All right, thank you all very much.